Anti-dilution provisions. This is again in relation to common stock versus preferred stock. Preferred stock shareholders get preferences. That's what makes them preferred. So they get rights and things that common stock shareholders don't. The one we are talking about right now is an anti-dilution provision. So what does that mean? It essentially means that if your company's doing well and it's worth a lot, and then it goes through a contraction and it's worth less when you do your next funding round, what happens? There's some decrease in value that happens, and so where does that decrease where does it go? Who has to shoulder the burden of that decrease in value? Where does that dilution go? So an anti-dilution provision gives the preferred stock shareholders some protection, potentially gives them some protection, and where they don't have to take all the dilution, or maybe they don't have to take any of the dilution. So here's how it works. There's three basic versions of an anti-dilution preference. You can have no preference, which is company favorable, if you have no protection at all. And that essentially means that you share the dilution equally. You can have a full ratchet, which is the most investor favorable version, which means that the investor doesn't get diluted at all, that the common shareholders do. And you can have something in the middle called a weighted average. So I'm going to show you guys from round A to round B what happens in each one of these scenarios. So let's say round A, the post-money valuation of round A was $5 million. So after you raised funding, your company was worth $5 million on your first round. Bad things happen in between round A and round B, and by the time you get to round B, the pre-money valuation is $4 million in round B. So let's look at the end of round A. After you've raised money for round A, the preferred stock shareholders, their share of this company was worth $3 million, and the common stock share was worth $2 million. So you go from a post-money of 5 to a pre-money of 4. Bummer. Some value has disappeared. Maybe you guys messed up sales or something. So let's say there's no provision, no anti-dilution provision, which means these two groups have to share the dilution. Because there's a 3-to-2 ratio, this has to add up to $4 million, of course. Because there's a 3-to-2 ratio, these guys lose $666,000 worth of value. These guys lose $333,000, which adds up to $1 million, because there's $1 million in lost value here. So these guys are going to be, roughly $2.3 million for preferred, and common is going to be roughly $1.6 million. Okay, so they've shared the dilution proportional, or I should say proportional. Yeah, proportional to their percentage of ownership. That's a pretty simple version. That's if there's no anti-dilution provision. All right, now let's look at a full ratchet, which is the most investor favorable version. In a full ratchet, the investor doesn't lose any value at all. All of the dilution happens in the common shareholders. So in this case, again, you went from $5 million to $4 million. You lost $1 million. There's minus $1 million going on here. So if we lost $1 million, who loses it? Full ratchet, common stock shareholders lose it all. So this is only worth $1 million, and the preferred stock shareholders, they keep their $3 million. Now this can get really bad. If you lose enough value that it completely washes out the common stock shareholders, they just disappear. The preferred stock shareholders just own the entire company. Now that can be terrible because it can wash a management team or a founder or anybody who owns common stock, just the employees. It can wash them completely out of the deal. That's called a down round. Actually, this is called a down round when you go from 5 to 4. So the third one, and the most, number 2, and the most complex to understand is something called a weighted average. So the weighted average essentially says that these two groups are going to share the dilution based on some mathematical formula. And there are various different variables that go into establishing who shares what percentage of the dilution. But the important thing to understand is that the dilution is shared, not equally, less than equally, but it's somewhere in between equally sharing the dilution and the common stockholders taking all of the dilution. So remember, bad things happen, the value of the company drops, you have a down round, there's going to be some dilution. Who shoulders that? If you're a preferred stock shareholder and you have an anti-dilution provision, odds are you won't shoulder as much of that dilution as you would if you had no provision at all.